Hello, everyone. We are very happy to host this our third webinar and dedicated to a project Responsibility to Protect. We had very interesting discussion in our two previous webinars, and very outstanding speakers speaking about issue of responsibility to protect and how this issue can be applicable to the situation in in Armenia and Artsakh. And we're also speaking about war atrocities, as well as we have presentation prepared by Artsakh Ombudsman. Our last presentation was made by a journalist from Turkey, and she was speaking about Turkish policy in relation to Armenia and in relation to preservation of cultural monuments. And then we were speaking about exchange of hostages and POWs. So today we have really honor to have distinguished guests and distinguished speakers. Mr. David Phillips is a director of program on peace building and rights in Columbia University, Institute for Study of Human Rights. Mr. Phillips has worked as a senior advisor with the UN Secretariat. He is advisor and foreign affairs expert to US Department of State during the administration of President Clinton, Bush, Obama. He is media analyst working with NBC Universal, CNBS, BBC World Service. He is also author of numerous books and articles, and his upcoming book is Turkey, an Uncertain Ally. And our second speaker is Mr. Zolyan, Mikayel Zolyan, who is a historian and political analyst. He has written numerous articles, but he is professor at Brussels University. He has been elected in 2019 deputy to National Assembly of Armenia. And I'm very happy to host both speakers. So first, I would like to give floor to Mr. David Phillips. Floor is yours, Mr. Phillips.
Well, Nora, thank you so much for your invitation today. I'm very grateful to you and to your organization for hosting me. It's an important discussion about the responsibility to protect and accountability so that there's a record of what's happened and the perpetrators are accountable for their crimes. So today I'm going to summarize briefly the recent developments in Artsakh since September. I'm going to talk about the disinformation campaign that's waged by Azerbaijan to confuse viewers and muddy the waters. Then I'm going to speak a little bit about individuals who are responsible for those crimes. Happy to take questions at the end of my presentation. So you all know from your proximity to the conflict that over just a few weeks, it took a terrible toll in casualties. About 3,400 Armenian soldiers were killed. Scores of civilians also died. In addition to that, Azerbaijan claims that almost 3,000 Azerbaijani soldiers died, as well as civilians. More than 500 Syrian mercenaries who were brought to the battlefield by Turkey to collaborate with Azerbaijan also died. There were also journalists who were killed and who disappeared. So over a very short period, I think 44 days, this war took a very terrible toll in terms of human suffering. There were 70,000 people displaced in Artsakh. It was very tragic for me to see people after the ceasefire agreement blowing up their homes so they wouldn't be occupied and used by others. Very sad when somebody is brought to the point where they feel they have to blow up their residence so that it's not misused by an occupier. We also know that this was not an old-fashioned war. This war was state-of-the-art. During the initial days prior to the war, we saw satellite imagery of Turkish F-16s on the airfield in Shusha. In addition, Turkey introduced its Bayraktar TB2 drones, which targeted Armenian armed forces and civilians. These drones took a terrible toll. They shaped the battlefield and made the struggle by the Armenian side even more difficult. In addition to that, we saw Turkish and Azeri armored vehicles, anti-tank landmines, artillery, targeting towns and villages. More than that, Baku was accused of using cluster bombs and even white phosphorus, both of which are banned weapons in international law. Armenian cultural icons and symbols were targeted. On October 8th, twice, Azerbaijani missiles struck the cathedral, the Holy Savior in Shushi. It's now controlled by Azerbaijan forces. After seizing the church, further vandalism occurred. The Dadivank monastery was seized by Azerbaijani forces, and in the Hadrut region, there were desecration of holy sites. Armed conflict ended on the 10th of November as a result of a ceasefire agreement that was brokered by the Russian Federation. It called for the deployment of 2,000 Russian peacekeepers for up to 5 years. The deal was terribly one-sided, and Prime Minister Pashinyan has received plenty of justifiable criticism for succumbing to terms that were disadvantageous to Armenians. Azerbaijan was able to get control of all the territory it captured, plus regions that are adjacent, such as Shusha. Azerbaijan was able to create a land corridor along Armenia's southern border to connect Nakhichevan and Azerbaijan. I understand now that there are joint military exercises underway involving Turkey and Azerbaijani forces along that southern border. The agreement called for the exchange of prisoners of war. However, this has languished. It also called for the return of refugees and IDPs, but this area of commitment also has seen very little progress. One would think that this was a civil war, and one might also believe Azerbaijani propaganda that the first shot was fired by Armenia, but this is not the case. This is no civil war. This was not provoked by the Armenian side. The conflict was orchestrated by Turkey and Azerbaijan. They brought in foreign fighters, namely mercenaries, jihadists from Libya and Syria. So we need to be very clear-eyed about the fact that this is a war of aggression against Armenians, and that the aggressors have committed terrible war crimes. We long have seen Azerbaijan's sophisticated and systematic disinformation campaign. And this has been noted by others as well. Facebook, Sophie Zhang, indicated that Facebook waited a year to open an investigation on the ruling political party of Azerbaijan that, quote, utilized thousands of inauthentic assets to harass the opposition, and also to defend Azerbaijan's governing New Azerbaijani Party, and to work with the party's youth union. As a result of this, on October 8th, Facebook deleted 589 accounts, more than 7,900 pages, and 447 Instagram accounts were also canceled. According to Facebook, these accounts were involved in, quote, inauthentic behavior. What does that mean? It means that they were lying about the conditions in Artsakh, trying to justify Azerbaijan's aggression. Azerbaijan has sponsored an online disinformation campaign. Pro-Azerbaijan hashtags are heavily manipulated, with a small group of high-volume accounts responsible for most mentions. These are not fully automated bots. They are curated by human users belonging to pro-regime youth organizations. Across all of these pro-Azerbaijan hashtags, dozens of accounts tweeted well over 1,000 times between July 14 and July 18 with some accounts posting more than 100 times a day. This suggests that there's a coordinated group of accounts that post high volume messages to create the impression that the online movement has more organic support than it actually does. The fact that this campaign was launched prior to the outbreak of hostilities in September also indicates that this was a premeditated operation and that Azerbaijan was not only softening the battlefield, but using social media and disinformation to soften international public opinion about what was actually going on. Colombia's President Lee Bollinger expressed concern that, quote, social networking's most dangerous human impact is that it can create more polarization, generating increasingly less room for debate and constructive discussion, which threatens our social fabric and democracy itself. I can say that Azerbaijan's disinformation campaign was established specifically for that purpose. When we hosted Zoom conferences, we received hundreds of aggressive messages from Azerbaijanis criticizing Colombia's support for Armenian victims. We felt that it was important to document what had actually happened. So Columbia University, very soon after the outbreak of hostilities, launched a webpage called Artsakh Atrocities. The webpage is a destination for all of the documentation that describes what happened. It was a joint project with the Artsakh Human Rights Ombudsman. We include reports from the Human Rights Ombudsman, from Human Rights Watch, from the ICRC. There is a page of statements from international diplomats. There are video and photo archives, some of them rather gruesome. We view the Artsakh Atrocities page as a counterweight to Azerbaijan's propaganda infrastructure. It represents an effort to make sure that the voices of Armenian victims are heard. It's also a place where we can identify the perpetrators. In the fog of war, it's very easy not only to lose track of the victims, but also not to chronicle who were the perpetrators of different war crimes. So we've been very direct with our Artsakh Atrocities page and naming names. And there are three categories of perpetrators that we've highlighted. The first are jihadi mercenaries. The second are Turkish commanders who were in the battlefield orchestrating events. And the third are Azerbaijani officials who themselves have been involved with initiating and instructing crimes against humanity. So I'm going to provide some information here about individuals who should be held accountable. And I'm going to start first with jihadi mercenaries. Saif Balud is also known as Saif Abu Bakr, was the leader of the Syrian National Army's Hamza division since 2016. He participated in Turkish military attacks against Kurds and others in Syria, such as Operation Olive Branch, targeting Afrin. And more recently, he and his group were involved in the Libyan civil war. He and 500 of his men were reportedly flown to Azerbaijan to take part in the conflict in Artsakh. Balud is a Syrian Turkmen. In 2013, he appeared in an ISIS propaganda video. Balud and his division, the Hamza division, are allegedly responsible for multiple war crimes, including kidnapping Kurdish women in Afrin and sexual violence. Not the kind of character who you want to invite to your home for dinner. Similarly, Fahim Isa, also known as Isa al-Turkmani, led the Syrian National Army's Sultan Murad division since 2015. He was directly involved in Operation Euphrates Shield, Operation Olive Branch, and the Libyan civil war. These code words for Turkey's military aggression may sound quaint, but the activities that Fahim Issa and Saif Balad undertook are anything but. They constitute the worst kind of war crimes. Fahim Issa was allegedly involved in the torturing of Kurdish civilians and also the indiscriminate shelling of civilians. Abu Amsha, whose real name is Muhammad al-Jassin, is the leader of the Suleiman Shah Brigade, which is nicknamed the Al-Amshat Militia. Gained prominence in 2018 as one of the most brutal factions occupying Afrin with Turkey's military support. In Afrin, Al-Amshat confiscated property, kidnapped individuals for ransom, looted, raped, and murdered. Abu Amsha allegedly was making $12 million a year from ransoms. He's accused of rape and murder. Like Issa and Balud, Abu Amsha is also a Turkmen. He became an important recruiter for Turkish-backed mercenaries in Libya and has played with his gang an important role on the battlefield in Artsakh. Ahmed Osman is another leader of the Sultan Murad division, who is involved in Euphrates Shield and Olive Branch, as well as the Libyan civil war. Likewise, Abu Jalal, a military leader of Hamza division, Muhammad al-Abdullah, head of the political bureau of Hamza, and Falala al-Haji, head of Failaq al-Sham, fought in Libya and then went to Artsakh, where they continued their bloodletting. Al-Haji and his men were connected to the Muslim Brotherhood and fought with Al-Qaeda in Idlib. These people just didn't show up on the battlefield on their own. They were brought there by Turkey, which provided the infrastructure for transporting them. I wouldn't be surprised if Turkey gave the bill to Azerbaijan, which covered all the costs. So let's not forget that there were Turkish commanders active in Artsakh who need to be held to account. Major General Gutiyar Ersey is the chief of the Operations Directorate of the Land Forces of Turkey. He oversaw Azerbaijan's general staff in Nagorno-Karabakh. He previously led the 2nd Commando Brigade against the PKK in northern Iraq and southeastern Turkey, which was notoriously cruel to Kurdish civilians and soldiers, and also included gray wolf elements. Ersey was involved in Syria and Libya, recruiting and overseeing mercenaries, as he has done in Artsakh. Lieutenant General Sarif Ongay is commander of the 3rd Army of Turkey's ground forces. According to the Armenian delegation to the OSCE, he took part in planning and conducting operations in Artsakh. He was spotted in Baku on September 4th, just before the outbreak of violent conflict in Artsakh. Major General Güksel Kaya is an important Turkish drone commander who heads Turkey's Air Force's 1st Supply and Maintenance Center. He was instrumental as the overall commander of the Bayraktar TB2 drones in Libya, as well as in Artsakh. We shouldn't underestimate the impact that these drones have had. A fair fight on the battlefield would have had a different outcome if Turkey wasn't using its drones forces to target Armenians on the ground. Adnan Tanriverdi is a retired Turkish general and founder of an organization called Sadat. This is a private defense contracting company that he started in 2012. In 1996, he was forced to leave the Turkish military for being too Islamist. He continued to have significant influence over Erdogan. Allegedly, Sadat helped counter the 2016 coup, to the extent that there was a coup, and I think there are serious questions about that. Sadat, his organization, has been referred to as the shadow military. Sadat coordinates Turkish support for Islamist movements, including support for Hamas, which has been designated a foreign terrorist organization by both the US and the EU. In 2018, the Israeli Security Service, Shin Bet, accused Sadat of transferring money to Hamas and arming the organization. A Sadat employee arranged for Hamas officials to visit a 2015 aviation and weapons show in Turkey, where the Hamas representatives expressed interest in the use of UAVs. Imagine how the battlefield would be different in Israel if Hamas was equipped with militarized drones. The third category of perpetrators are Azerbaijani commanders. And let me summarize for the audience today identify a few of them and summarize their role. Major General Hikmat Hasanov is commander of the 1st Army Corps of Azerbaijan, which was on the northern front line of the Artsakh conflict. He was also active in the War of 2016. Major General Mais Barkudarov is the commander of the 2nd Army Corps of Azerbaijan, which also was active on the southern front line in the Artsakh conflict. He was active in capturing Jabrayil, where many civilians were killed. Lieutenant General Hikmat Mirzayev is head of Azerbaijan's special forces, which were active in the wars of 2016 and 2020. Many Azeri special forces were trained by Turkey. Recently, Lieutenant General Mirzayev was promoted in Turkey in recognition for his service in the Artsakh conflict. So there's a whole infrastructure of personnel that were involved in the aggression against Artsakh. They involved Azeri commanders, senior Turkish officials, and then up to 3,000 jihadis that were brought to the front lines by Turkey at Azerbaijan's request. So the idea that this was somehow an organic civil war between the parties is completely wrong. It was planned and orchestrated as a military aggression by Turkey and Azerbaijan against Armenian forces. So given the appalling events in Artsakh, what's the role of the international community and the United States in dealing with crimes that have been committed and in moving forward with accountability? It may not be possible, either through the ICC or the European Court for Human Rights, to hold individuals accountable for their war crimes, but the United States can consider more robust sanctions against Turkey. It could also start to use designation of a state sponsor of terrorism when referring to Azerbaijan, since Azerbaijan was directly involved in bringing jihadists to the front lines. Many of you may have seen the confirmation hearing of Anthony Blinken on the 19th of January, where he spoke directly to Armenian issues. First and foremost, he reiterated Joe Biden's pledge to, quote, recognize the Armenian genocide. No more industry of denial, no more succumbing to Turkish pressure. It's time now for the US government to fully and clearly recognize the events between 1915 and 1923 as a genocide, and in so doing to bring additional pressure against Turkey to recognize its role, the role of Turks in the Ottoman Empire, so that these kinds of crimes do not occur again in Artsakh or elsewhere. Perhaps some of you have seen my writings in which I've called the aggression in Artsakh a second Armenian genocide. Only with vigilance and honesty and naming names that we can prevent that from happening. Mr. Blinken further said that the Biden administration would determine the wording of the White House statement to mark Remembrance Day on April 24th, based on consultations with the US Congress. Given the fact that we can expect such language from the Biden administration. I don't think we should wait till April 24. US officials and US sponsored media like Radio Free Europe should be given a green light to use the term Armenian genocide now in its reporting about events in the past. And they should be encouraged to report transparently about events more recent and ongoing. The Biden administration has also said that it would reinvigorate US engagement to find a permanent settlement to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and to protect Artsakh security. In so doing, it should affirm the central and exclusive role of the Minsk group. There have been recent initiatives by Turkey, Russia, and Iran to set up a parallel mediation. The US should clearly state that the Minsk group is the place where Artsakh-related issues should be negotiated. We can't allow a parallel diplomacy which is equipped with rogue representatives who deny war crimes and are deniers of genocide, both historical and current. This question of prisoners of war is also critical to address. The agreement that Russia helped broker called for the immediate return of prisoners of war, but frankly, that hasn't happened. The Azerbaijan side refuses to release POWs. The US should loudly call on Azerbaijan to release these prisoners of war. It can do so in the same breath as it raises the possibility that Azerbaijan is a state sponsor of terrorism. If Azerbaijan feels there are genuine repercussions to its actions, it may change what it says and change what it does. In addition, the Biden administration has said it will review US security assistance to Azerbaijan. In recent years, Azerbaijan has been receiving more munitions and sophisticated weapons from the US than Armenia has been receiving. Without any equivocation, the Biden administration should fully enforce Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act, which was enacted in 1992 in direct response to Azerbaijan's hostile actions against Armenia and Artsakh. I see we've been joined on the Zoom conference by Van Krikorian, who's co-chair of the Armenian Assembly of America, who's done stunning work in Washington as an advocate for Armenian interests. He's a close friend and colleague, and glad to see that you've joined us today. In addition, the Biden administration has made clear that it will ensure the humanitarian needs of the Armenian people. Due to the recent conflict, these humanitarian needs are not being met. It has stated that the US would support and provide funds for demining efforts in Nagorno-Karabakh. These demining efforts had been phased out during the previous administration. The Biden team has also said that it will support the provision to Armenia of security assistance and aid, which also strengthens democratic governance and promotes economic growth. There's a clear link here between democracy, economy, security, and resilience. We need to recognize that link and support Armenians in all of these critical areas. And I've already talked before about the importance of deterring future aggression by Azerbaijan. Suggesting that it is a state sponsor of terrorism will be noticed and heard loud and clear in Baku and may affect the actions and statements by Azeri officials. So, Gulnara, in my presentation, I've tried to give you a snapshot of what's happened so far. I've identified perpetrators from these three categories: the jihadists, Turkish commanders, as well as Azeri leaders. And I've talked about what the Biden administration and US officials can do about it. The reason we launched our Artsakh atrocities page is because in the fog of war, facts are often forgotten, disinformation often resonates, And we wanted from day one to record the facts and counter Azerbaijan's propaganda. I'd appreciate it, Gulnar, if you or your staff could provide a link to those who joined the Zoom conference today, so they have access to the ARTSOC atrocities page. And I just want to assure you and your guests today that Columbia University stands in solidarity with Armenians in ARTSOC. We have solidarity with the victims of Azerbaijan's aggression, and we don't sugarcoat Turkey's crimes, not only in Azerbaijan, but in other places outside its borders where Turkish armed forces and their jihadi proxies are committing crimes against humanity. And we feel that Turkey's role requires careful study so that we can reconsider in the future the extent and scope of US cooperation with Turkey, extending the Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, expanding the scope of sanctions and tightening them will send a clear signal to Ankara that state-sponsored criminal activity won't be tolerated by the Biden administration. Our concern starts first and foremost in ARTSOC, and we pledge to work with you to maintain the record and to be advocates for accountability. So Gulnar, I'm going to stop there, and I'd be pleased to hear from you or your colleagues if there are any questions.
Thank you very much for the such comprehensive coverage of this multidimensional war. And prior to opening floor to the questions, I have also my own question. My concern is always goes to the Russian peacekeeping forces. And when we're speaking about return to Minsk group, I think we also need to have not only Russian peacekeeping forces, but we have to multi-state forces being stationed there. And my concern is also that Russian peacekeeping forces still have no status, described status or code of conduct, and also about the monitoring team that is going to be established, whom they are going to monitor, Russian-Turkish monitoring group, whom they are going to monitor, and how civilians would be protected if they, for example, if their rights would be violated and they will be going to complain to Russian peacekeepers. It reminds me very old Soviet system when you were complaining on the same body. So I think this is also an issue, very sensitive issue. And I've been working a lot with peacekeepers in many parts of the world. And I know that clear status, clear roles of peacekeepers are extremely important.
So the development of a code of conduct is a critically important piece of work. I don't think we can leave it to officials. I think there's a role here for civil society and your organization in drafting the code of conduct. We'd be very pleased to work with you during the drafting process. And when a code of conduct is developed, the ARTSOC atrocities site will be a perfect place to present it. So we should focus on that. We should also focus on the point you raised about monitoring. Here again, I don't think that we can rely on official institutions to do the monitoring because governments have an interest in what's going on. Sometimes governments are guilty of perpetrating crimes. So we should set up a civil society monitoring group.
Absolutely.
In order to keep an eye on what's happening, to release reports to the international community, and to spotlight abuses by either Russian peacekeepers or others, like Turkish or Azeri forces that are on the ground. I also want to start taking names of jihadists that are committing crimes. So if you or any of your guests today can expand the inventory of jihadists that are working, that are fighting in ARTSOC, working is not the right term, that are committing crimes in ARTSOC, please provide that information to us. And with my associate, Charlie Randall, who's our content coordinator, we'd be pleased to spotlight their names and actions they've committed.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? Now the floor is open to questions. Yeah, here is Mr. Grigorian.
Well, I see a number of friends actually, and I am sure you guys are going to thank David, which you should, because he did an excellent job, of course. So I won't have to do that, thank God. And I apologize, but I have to run to another meeting shortly. But there's an aspect of David's involvement with this issue that I think is worthwhile talking to your group about, Gulnara, another old friend, of course. That is that back in 2001, and I think people on this call remember it better than David and I do, there was an effort to start track 2 or civil society contacts with Azerbaijani civil society. And the Azeri government then, and for the last 20 years, had always shut that down. Creating the conditions for peace, for reconciliation, do involve recognizing crimes against humanity and accounting for them properly and eliminating the risks in the future. But I am pretty sure that there are people on this call who also have experience with the denial of basic civil society contacts by that authoritarian government. And I think while it is still fresh in your minds, if you can document that or talk about that, that would be helpful to the overall cause, because frankly, I think we all know, we see how Azeri school children are trained, we see what their press is like, and so the risks right now for future atrocities is still there. So, the parallel that you could draw is almost to, during the Minsk group discussions, especially after 2016, there were supposed to be mechanisms put in for monitoring and an investigative mechanism of who breached the ceasefire, when and where. And Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh were fully supportive of those, and Azerbaijan walked away from those agreements. In today's environment, the victim side, the Armenian side, the Artsakh side, is vastly outnumbered and overspent by the other side, which has far more sophisticated public relations and even government relations than we do at this point. But these two fundamental points of, if you weren't going to commit atrocities, if you weren't going to breach the ceasefire, then why didn't you agree to an investigative mechanism and monitoring at the time? And if you really wanted peace, why didn't you let your civil society deal with our civil society? Are going to be important factors in any forum in which all of you will be working and speaking in the future. So I just wanted to add that. David remembers that chapter better than I do. Back in the early 2000s when those efforts were just completely shut down. And I do apologize for having to leave early, but I wish I could see all the people who are in dark boxes. I hope, if it's because their electricity's been turned off, their electricity will come on at some point and then we can see their faces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to mention that our organization was from the first day involved in peacekeeping and meeting with Azerbaijani counterparts. But in recent years, it became completely impossible. Even for myself, I was in a blacklist and I couldn't take any positions in UN while mentioning Artsakh once at the General Assembly. So this was so, and one should feel that while closing civil society, there were already signs of something have to be happening. There were early warning signals of that.
All right, well, thank you all. Thanks, David, thanks.
Thanks, man.
Other questions?
So maybe I can maybe I'll pick up where Van left off.
Yeah.
Just talking about the importance of civil society, contact, communication, and cooperation. Track 2 is an exercise that is parallel to official diplomacy. It engages civil society creatively in finding solutions to shared problems, with the idea of mobilizing concerned parties, including the governments, to take specific action. I can say from the efforts that we made on Track 2, that we were stymied by the government in Baku. There were a half a dozen Azeris who had the courage to participate, but the government bent over backwards to obstruct broader civil society participation. Many of these participants were harassed or intimidated. Some were imprisoned, others fled the country.
Yeah.
So we recognize the importance of civil society engagement and track 2, but at the same time, we have to recognize the limitations.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that conditions exist in the future where track 2 initiatives can be resumed. And since this is an area where we have some institutional memory and some expertise, again, Columbia stands ready to assist civil society practitioners that are interested in dialogue.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Miss Judith Zolyan has a question, as I see her hand.
Judith has a question.
Yeah, Judith. Judith, your microphone.
Judith, you have to unmute.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you very much, David, for an excellent presentation and also for the work you're doing on the Artsakh Atrocities page. It's of paramount importance to get the information, especially in a visible, concentrated site. My question has to do with some of the media in the U.S., the media like the New York Times, the journalists, also NPR. They were so, it wasn't even a question of both sidism. They were biased in favor of the Azerbaijani positions, and the news was extremely, the articles were extremely distressing, and the New York Times barely acknowledged any of the concerns that were raised by the Armenian community in many forms, through op-eds, through letters to the editor. They did not even address it. How do you think the Armenian community, as well as others, should try to get the major news media organizations that were so biased to face the reality of what was happening on the ground? That's the first question. And I assume that the Artsakh Atrocities page would do a lot to help them. Have they been coming to that page at all, to actually read what is really happening on the ground, as opposed to listening to and reporting the one side?
So let me respond to both of your questions. In order to function as a journalist in Azerbaijan, the media company needs an agreement, a memorandum of understanding with the government of Azerbaijan. Journalists live in constant fear that that MOU is going to be rescinded. So they often bend over backwards not to offend the host institution. That's wrong. It needs to be rectified. There are other ways of getting your story out, not only through correspondence and news reporting. Now, I urge you to reach out to international media, to write op-eds that express your views and provide information about what's really going on, to send letters to the editor. There are a plethora of platforms that exist that are a critique of Turkey's conduct in It's Near Abroad. Web pages like Aval will publish your articles if you have something worthwhile to say. So don't hesitate to reach out to the media yourself. You have a voice. That voice should be heard. And if you frame your case coherently, you've got a strong likelihood of getting published. So that was your first question. Remind me, Judith, what was the second question?
Have the U.S. media organizations like the New York Times, the NPR, and others, have they been coming to the Artsakh Atrocities page to try to, to get information?
So thanks for asking that. We view our work on the Artsakh Atrocities project in different phases. The first phase involved information gathering and platforming. And I think that we now have a site that's pretty comprehensive. It's as inclusive on war crimes and atrocities as any site that I'm familiar with. So we're about to segue into the next phase of our work, which is how do we use the Artsakh Atrocities project to shape the media and policymakers and opinion leaders in the US and around the world. So we're just about to embark on that. We're going to do a series of brainstorming sessions, at Columbia. Artush is helping us with a brainstorming session with Armenian young professionals and students around the country. And we really want people's views about how the site could be used appropriately. Gulnara, I'd encourage you to share information on the site with your circle of friends and colleagues, and maybe we should have a further discussion about that. Our goal is not simply to gather information. That's hard and necessary, but it's not all there is to do. We want to use that information to shape public policy debate, to create systems of accountability. And if we can't get individuals in the dock before tribunals, we want countries to be considered for sanctions. So, Judith, we're committed to the next phase, using the site proactively. We're just now transitioning from where we are in data gathering to the data dissemination. I'm reluctant to use a term like weaponizing the information, but that's what we need to do. We need to get the information to people who are writing about it, who are studying it, who are policymakers, and make sure they know the facts about what's been going on. But thanks for your suggestion.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll be very happy partnering with.
And I also have a quick question.
Yep.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for your huge work and for your presentation, which was extremely interesting. It's already quite visible that, unfortunately, the foreign policy of Armenia was far more weak than the policy of Azerbaijan during the past 30 years. And I'm interested, and you told many times that unfortunately the propaganda from Azerbaijani side is very high, and very often the information is presented completely different way. And the flow of fake news, of course, is very huge. Can you please tell what's, on your opinion, how our foreign policy should try to develop new maybe policy directions or generate new ideas how to deal with this fake news on the state level, to try to resist, and how to strengthen our foreign policy to explain to the international community what was really going on.
Thank you, Anna. You'll see on the general site of the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia an article that I co-authored with Lisa Gulasarian from Harvard, specifically about disinformation. So it's important that those kinds of stories are written and published and distributed. So if you have a chance to read it, please distribute it. We want people to know that we have a huge disinformation campaign that we're working against, and that we need all hands on deck to tell the truth about what's going on. As far as how we can further and more effectively disseminate truth-telling, there should be a mechanism beyond the Human Rights Ombudsman to keep an account of what's going on. We'd be happy to work with local officials on that score. The Artsakh Atrocities site is just one effort. It needs to be disseminated, shared, and then it needs to be used to influence public opinion. We have a new Congress in the United States. Thanks to efforts of Van Krikorian and the Armenian Assembly of America, there's a very effective lobby in the US. We need to work with partner organizations like the Assembly to get the message out. Each of you probably know members of parliament in different countries. Should share the site with them. Having an authoritative source like Columbia document the truth can be used effectively by civil society. It's also something that the Armenian government should be using. We've had Zoom conferences with Armenia's ambassador to the US. As is often the case in a crisis, there are divisions among political actors, and Armenia's politicians need to come together, adopt a unified position, and work strategically as a team to get the message out. That hasn't happened as a result of the stress that the Armenian government has been under. Let's make it happen going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much.
More questions? If there are no questions, then I would like to thank you so much. And I promise you that we will disseminate all the information, will be your organization that would partner with you and do a lot of work in assisting to disseminate all this information and collect information here. We also were thinking about women's groups to be on this monitoring body. We're trying to, because we do a lot of projects with women's groups, and that's why we thought about it would be very, very good if we have women's group joining this monitoring body. I don't know to what extent it will be possible, but we'll do our best in order to get there and be part of that process.
Well, now let me mention that on our Artsakh Atrocities site, we do not have a page focused on women's issues.
Yeah.
I'd like to have a page focused on women's issues, particularly if rape and sexual violence have been prevalent, or if women are targeted for humiliation or torture. So if you have the capacity to do that research, to identify individual cases, to send us articles or reports, I know that's something that Charlie, our content coordinator, and friends of the project like Anush would welcome. So please share that with us. And that goes for information across the board. You're pushing on an open door. We want the truth to be told. We have a platform for telling it. We need partners in order to make that happen. So we look forward to partnership, deepening our cooperation in the future. But thank you all.
Thank you. Here is one question from Heidi Mentold. She says, are there similar contacts to European governments, experts? I know the relationship to Turkey is probably more complicated.
So we should be identifying officials in the European Parliament and European governments that have a portfolio that concerns Turkey and Armenian issues. We should be reaching out to them. The next phase of our work will involve targeted dissemination to opinion makers and policy makers. So I'm sure there are a lot of people in Europe that we should be communicating with regularly. We have limited bandwidth. We can't do that on our own. We can do that with you, Laura, and your guests. So please, by all means, reach out, share the information. You know, we're ready to cooperate, but we need to have the initiative come from you as well as from our side.
Okay. Thank you very much. Shall we move to another speaker if there are no questions? Really?
Okay, well, let me just say that I'm leaving early because I have an important conversation with a US official about Armenian issues. So I pledge to represent Armenia's interests as best I can and as often as I can, and at the most senior levels that I can penetrate.
We put all our hopes in your hands. Thank you very much for all your work, and we look forward to cooperating and trying to be as assistive as we can.
Thanks very much, and thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.
Good work, David Phillips.
Thank you.
Where did that come from?
Harry.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thanks for your kind words.
Thank you. Here are a number of questions, but I don't know whether you can take, just thank you very much. Now, I would like to pass the microphone to another distinguished speaker, Mikayel Zolyan.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank David Phillips if he's still here, or if not, please, I can't see. Oh, I think he's still here. So
I'm still here.
Thank you very much for both your, the presentation that you gave, and of course for your work, which is to say that it's valuable. It's really, it's a very weak word to describe what you are doing. I think it's something that has the potential to change a lot of things, and I hope that it will. And I remember we've met, I think about 10 years ago, more or less, when the times were much more optimistic, and I think we met at a conference or seminar devoted to Armenia-Turkey relations. At the time, it seemed that there was an opening, and unfortunately, that opening proved to be, short-lived, and Armenia-Turkey relations stayed where they were, and that was one of the causes of what has happened. So it is really, I don't. A lot of the things that I wanted to talk about were already addressed by David Phillips. So I will try to focus on maybe some other issues that he did not have time to address. How much time do I have?
An hour.
An hour?
Yeah, half an hour. Okay.
Half an hour. Okay, that's an hour would seem. So maybe I will talk for 10 to 15 minutes, and then
Okay.
we can take some questions, because I think it's always better to address the questions that the audience has, because there are so many issues that we can talk about, but it's better to focus on the ones that the people in audience are interested in. And also I want to thank Gulnara Shahinyan and all your colleagues for organizing this event, and I hope that you will continue this work. Because it is really important to talk about everything that has happened today and to make sense of it. And this is very important also for not just to get the information out of Armenia and Artsakh, and to educate the international public about what has happened, but it's also important in terms of dealing with everything that has happened inside Armenia and Artsakh. And because for Armenian society, we all understand that this is very painful, and we need to make sense of it, and we need to talk about it. And as David Phillips said, we need to put our differences aside, and we need to arrive to a common position, which we will be presenting to the international community. What can I say on the topic of today's meeting? Obviously, what happened in 2020, it was one of the most tragic events of Armenian history in the last several centuries, and it is also one of the most tragic things that have happened globally around the world in the recent times. And I think it is also raising many important issues, not just for Armenia or the Caucasus or the post-Soviet space, but it is raising many issues globally. And one of these issues is that as a result of the technological advancement, we have a situation in which people who have at best 19th century worldview, well, maybe even medieval worldview, they control technologies that are 21st century. Mm-hmm. And the war showed that you may have somebody with a mindset of authoritarian dictator, or somebody with a mindset of a religious fanatic, or somebody with a mindset of somebody who's trying to reestablish the medieval empire. And these people have access to very advanced technologies that are also very deadly. So the infamous Bayraktar drones, which are considered Turkish drones. In fact, when you look at them, they don't really deserve to be called Turkish produced, because most of the parts of these drones were produced in various countries, mostly countries of the West, or as they call it now, the global North. And these technologies have been sold or transferred, or whatever the word that we want to use. These technologies have found their way to Turkey and Azerbaijan. Well, Azerbaijan, it's a corrupt dictatorship, the only post-Soviet country which has a hereditary power, which it's even for post-Soviet standards, that's something that stands out. And Turkey, of course, it's a big country and a complicated country with developed civil society and so on. But in the last decade, we have seen how Turkey moved from a more or less democratic country with certain issues. It moved to what can be described as another dictatorship in which that seeks to establish some kind of a medieval empire or race to return to the glory of the medieval times. And this is not something that I'm making up. This is something that can be seen in the official statements of Turkish officials, and the way they are glorifying the Ottoman Empire, the way they are glorifying the leaders of the Young Turk group who are guilty of the genocide. And just today or yesterday, President Erdogan posted a picture of Kazim Karabekir, who was the head of the Turkish army that attacked Armenia in 1920. So obviously, all this means that these people are, they don't have a modern worldview, but they are, they have their hand on modern technologies. And also, Turkey is a NATO member. And that raises a lot of questions, because basically what happened is that a NATO member was involved, we can say indirectly, but sometimes quite directly. It was involved in a conflict in the South Caucasus, and it was involved in a war against the civilian population. And I think other NATO countries, they need to really ask themselves the question, why this happened, and is it something that can be sustained? Is this situation something that is sustainable for NATO? And I think that judging from Mr. Phillips, what Mr. Phillips said, these questions are being asked. We know that in many NATO countries there is a debate about that on different levels, whether in the parliaments, in the media, in also among the politicians. But unfortunately, so far we have not seen real action in this regard. Another issue which is very important for our today's conversation, and it was mentioned in the title of our meeting, is the issue of responsibility to protect. So I would like to say a couple of words about this. Well, we know what the issue is. So there's at least since the end of the Cold War, or probably even before that, there was this debate about is responsibility to protect, should it be part of the international system, or is it something that can be too dangerous, since it may somehow justify intervention of stronger powers into the internal affairs of smaller countries. And this debate, I mean, both sides of the debate have their arguments, but I think what happened in Artsakh in 2020, it shows that international system does need to have some form of institutionalized responsibility to protect approach. Because what happened in Artsakh, it's not only dangerous in a sense that this refers to Armenians in Artsakh or the region, but it can also be a very dangerous global precedent. Basically, what happened is there's a very common saying that is repeated by many politicians all over the world, saying that conflicts cannot be solved by force, conflicts cannot be solved militarily. Well, basically, Turkey and Azerbaijan, they tried to show the world that conflicts can be solved militarily. And if one country or two countries are allowed to solve conflicts militarily, we are not discussing, what they were, the history, the national self-determination versus territorial integrity issues. That's all, a topic for another very long conversation. But basically, what happened is two leaders decided that they can use sheer force to resolve a conflict, which was being managed at the moment by the OSCE, and they think that they have did it. they have done it. If you look at the statements both by Erdogan and Aliyev, you can see this idea that they resolve this conflict. There is no more a question of Karabakh. There's no more the question of status, etc. Of course, it's not true because even though obviously Turkey and Azerbaijan had very significant gains, especially Turkey, but obviously the conflict is not resolved. The issue is still there. They did not achieve their maximalist program, which was basically to do ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. They did it in parts of Artsakh, but not the whole republic. So republic still exists. Of course, it's weakened. It lost a lot of territories. It lost the population, but the republic is still there. The peacekeeper force is there. The Russian peacekeepers are there, and Azerbaijan paid a very high price for it, not just in numbers of the soldiers who were killed, but also in terms of its sovereignty, because right now Azerbaijan basically is a country that has two foreign armies on its territory, and there's a non-recognized republic there, which international community views as something that is distinct from the rest of Azerbaijan. I mean, obviously there is no agreement about status, but if you look at all the diplomatic language that is being used today, even those countries that sort of tend to support Azerbaijani position, that make a distinction between those regions that have been occupied by Azerbaijanis recently and the remaining territory of Artsakh. So, of course, Azerbaijan is now in a state of euphoria. The population, the elites, they believe that they have achieved a great victory, but they have created many problems for themselves. And I would compare this to, this very common topic in global literature of, somebody wants something so much that they decide to sell their soul to the devil. And in a way, Azerbaijan decided to sell its sovereignty in exchange for these territories that they now claim to have liberated. So for Azerbaijan, there's a lot of problems, but of course, the biggest the outcome of this was the fact that a large part of Republic of Artsakh has been occupied by Azerbaijanis. There's a very high humanitarian cost. I will not go into all these issues which David Phillips described really in detail. And again, the question is, if all these issues go unpunished, what kind of a precedent will it set for the region, for the rest of the world, for Armenia and Azerbaijan? Because today, Azerbaijani government has started to talk about confidence building measures. They claim that they want peace, they want economic cooperation. And what kind of economic cooperation can happen when there is still basically an unknown number of prisoners of war, or rather hostages being held by Azerbaijan, when there are postal stamps issued which basically show Karabakh as a territory that is being disinfected, which reminds of Nazi propaganda and so on. So I think this is partly a result of this euphoria that is still dominant in Azerbaijan, but also partly it is a result of the international community's position, in which international community has failed to unequivocally condemn the actions of Azerbaijan and of Turkey. And of course, until this issue is addressed, a stable peace is impossible. Of course, we believe that there has to be a peaceful solution, about which we were talking about all the time before the war and after the war. Armenian sides never said that want to have this no war, no peace situation forever. Of course, a peaceful, stable solution was always one of our goals, or the most important goals. The same with opening the roads and economic integration. It was always part of our agenda, and it was actually Turkey that closed the Turkey and Azerbaijan closed the borders. They imposed the blockade. So opening of all the roads is, of course, in the interest of both Armenia and Artsakh. But to be sustainable, peace has to be based on approaches that are actually peaceful. It cannot be a result of some kind of dominant militant rhetoric that is being enforced by one of the sides. Of course, such peace is unsustainable, and such peace will only lead to new wars and new conflicts, whether in 5 years or later. So I think here international community has a big role to play, and it has to do it especially in order to make sure that this tragedy that happened last year is never to be repeated again, and there is sustainable peace in the region. So I think I'll stop here, and there are very, there's a large number of issues that I wanted to address, like the OSCE Minsk group, other international structures and so on. But maybe if there are questions about that, maybe I will just talk about that. And also, if there are any questions regarding the Armenian internal agenda and so on, I'm ready to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mikayel, for this comprehensive coverage. I have a question which was also raised by David about track to diplomacy. You have been also working very closely with academics and think tanks in Azerbaijan, and we were working very closely with NGOs. Of course, this process stopped long ago, but I think on academic level, it was still continuing. What is happening now? Is there any opportunity to start something now? Because as far as I feel, the voices are really silent. Only those are speaking who are outside of Azerbaijan. But I don't think anybody speaking in Azerbaijan, trying to bring some, reconciliation or something.
Yes, that's a good question. Unfortunately, as you said, there are very few voices heard. And most of the voices that are heard are from outside of Azerbaijan. It's people who have emigrated from Azerbaijan, and there, even again, among these people, I would say there are two approaches. So there's one which is probably more widespread, is completely siding with the official propaganda, or not completely, but mostly siding with that. And then there are individuals who tend to question this official propaganda, which is a very courageous thing to do. But these people are being very strongly marginalized, and their voice becomes an exception rather than the rule. So it is hard to imagine that this section of Azerbaijani public can play a definitive role. So unfortunately, it was Azerbaijani government's decision to basically put an end to most contacts between civil societies, which was done again about 8 to 10 years ago. And the first signs of it came earlier, but the real, crackdown came in 2014 to 2015, around this time. And then for 3 or 4 years after that, there have been some contacts, but quite episodic. And then in the run-up to the war, these contacts just completely disappeared, which once again shows that this war was not an accident, or nor was it a response to some claim that it was because the Armenians said this and they said that, that's why this war happened. I mean, obviously the war was planned for a long time, and the timing for the war was chosen quite meticulously, and the silencing of the civil society was part of the strategy that Azerbaijani and Turkish governments had for a long time. Now the situation has changed. Maybe there will be a change also in the Azerbaijani government's position. Also, Russia is pushing for dialogue, and then of course we hope that Europe, US, which have been sort of not very active in the recent period, especially in the case of United States, it was the previous administration did not have a very big interest in this region. And in the case of Europe, it was because of Brexit and other issues, the COVID epidemic, etc. So these actors were less active than usually. Today, I think both US and Europe can play a big role, especially when it comes to track 2 diplomacy or track 1.5 diplomacy, when it comes to restoring the civil society context. But also, I think they should not be, if it's in a certain area, it is impossible to have a two-sided project. That should not stop them from working, for example, in other issues such as humanitarian issues or reconstruction, supporting the refugees, etc.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. Questions? Here is from Graziella Pavone. Do you think there were opportunities missed for the resolution of the conflict before the escalation?
It depends on what time period are we taking. If we're taking the last few months or even the last year or two, I'm afraid there were not many opportunities. I think pretty much the last, if you look at what happened in, what led to the war, there is it's like a long road which in different points in this on this road different actors took decisions which eventually brought us here. So of course, obviously, Armenian government has its share of the current and the previous ones. Obviously, Azerbaijani government has its share, the international community has its share, Turkey has its huge share, especially when it comes to the current escalation. I'm afraid that the last more or less realistic opportunity came in 2010, 2011. Since then, it was mostly already a very one-sided dialogue in which one-sided concessions were demanded from Armenia, and Armenia, basically all the previous governments, they agreed to these concessions, and then when they did agree, Azerbaijan introduced new demands.
Yeah.
So I have the impression that for Azerbaijan, it was not just important to get back the territories, as they said, but or what in their rhetoric. But I have the impression that Azerbaijani side wanted to have a war, actually, because I think the whole propaganda, it's more than propaganda. In a way, Azerbaijani statehood or Azerbaijani national identity was built on this idea of revenge. After the first war ended in 1994, the idea that somehow Azerbaijanis have to take their revenge for this war, it became the basis of national identity, which was shared both by the government, the opposition, a large part of civil society, and so on. So I think that in an ideal world, maybe there was a time when there could have been a compromise which would have averted this war. But in reality, I think you had a situation where, on one hand, Azerbaijan was, getting ready for the war, and the whole national identity was being built on this idea of revenge. And on the other hand, you had the Armenian society where the results of the events of the 90s, they became part of everyday life. People, did not perceive it as something that they were young people who were born with these borders, and people who, for them, the idea that certain territories could be exchanged for something, it seemed, completely unacceptable. So I think if we are talking about real life and, not some theoretical constructions, I'm afraid that this war was basically inevitable, which obviously does not mean that we shouldn't be asking this question and over again and trying to understand what could have been done differently.
Thank you. Graziella, do you have anything to add or no? Okay, thank you.
I thought there was another question written.
2018, it was about 2018, whether there were any opportunities.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say. 2018 is, I think, again, if we have kind of, in theory, there were these opportunities, but if you look at the way how different, the Armenian and the Azerbaijani societies and the people in Artsakh, how the differences in how they perceive the reality, and also if we look at the international power struggle that was going on around the Caucasus, I don't think that the war was inevitable. I think that the war was inevitable, but obviously, looking back, we can find some periods where probably something could have been done, and unfortunately, it hasn't been done. Maybe 2018 was one of these years when something could have been done. But I think there was also a question from someone else about Azerbaijan's next moves.
Yes, it's from Andrea Phillips from the Romanian embassy. She says, what do you think about Azerbaijan's next move could be? Do you think they will add additional conditions to the returning of the remaining POWs?
Well, that's obviously something that we cannot really know, but there is we're trying to analyze what is happening, and there are several scenarios, and obviously what is happening now is Azerbaijan is trying to maximize its gains. It understands that this kind of favorable situation that has been created as a result of the events of 2020, it won't last very long, so they want to maximize their gains, but also there's not much that they can count on. So also I think in the actions that we see now, particularly the holding of the prisoners of war, there's also an element of kind of psychological warfare, because it's obvious that after the ceasefire of November 9 or 10, whatever, however you count it, starting a new conflict is out of the question, because that would mean clashes with the Russian peacekeepers or attacking the, internationally recognized territory of Republic of Armenia, which would again lead to a clash with the Collective Security Treaty Organization. So that's not an option. Mm-hmm. But Azerbaijan and Turkey are using the psychological warfare or the hybrid warfare or the information warfare mechanism, whatever you call it. So we are seeing a lot of provocations. We are seeing the military maneuvers in eastern Turkey, close to the Armenian border. And unfortunately, there will be probably some of these kind of actions before there is more or less sustainable peace. So I think what they are doing is they're trying to maximize their gains because they understand that this shock and the kind of depressive state that the Armenian society and the society in Artsakh have been going through, this will end at some point. There is already more internal stability in Armenia and Artsakh. Things are being done. There are measures taken to also, when it comes to the military, of preparing new. Well, I don't want to go deep into that, but anyway, Armenia is going slowly but surely. Armenia is coming out of the deepest parts of the crisis that we found ourselves in November 2020. The same with Artsakh. People are returning. Many Armenians are going back to Artsakh, and if you look at the, for example, the property prices in Artsakh, they're not falling. So it's not that, as maybe some people in Azerbaijan were hoping that Armenians from Artsakh will all sell their houses and leave, as it has happened in the past in Nakhichevan, for example. But no, it's not happening. People are returning. Even people from other countries are coming to Artsakh and Armenia. So I think their aim is to maximize their gains through using this kind of information hybrid warfare at this point. But eventually, I think everyone understands that eventually there has to be some kind of agreement, which because obviously the We have 2 statements so far from November and from January, and there has to be more than that. It was mentioned code of conduct for the peacekeepers, more detailed agreement on the, on the peacekeeping force, and so on and so forth. I can't hear you.
Thank you very much. Of course, a detailed agreement would bring more light, more concrete things, and we can be not would leave space for manipulation or changing, and also code of conduct for peacekeepers, which really concerns me very much about, and it will enhance security of people in Artsakh. Are there any questions? Go ahead. Yes, microphone.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Gulnara, and thank you for organizing this webinar. Thank you, Mikayel. I have a question. You and Mr. David said we have to have discussion in our country, discussion between politicians and civil society. How you imagine this discussion today? I mean, with today's government and civil society, because very important to have strong strategy at this moment, especially for civil society who work in a peace work or have some projects in peace work.
Yes, that's a good question. I think it's a bit different in what David Phillips meant about from his side. I think it has to do more with informing the government or the civil society, because many people outside of Armenia just don't know what happened. Yeah. And I think what David Phillips and his colleagues are doing is very important in that direction. When talking about Armenia, of course, here we need to have a dialogue between everybody, between the political forces, politicians, civil society. Unfortunately, we are very divided, and everybody's looking for culprits, everybody's looking for scapegoats. That, it's a psychological mechanism. It's easy to say that, okay, that, there were these traitors, these 1, 2, or 10 people, they were the ones who are guilty of everything, and just accuse them of everything and then move further. So that's a very easy way out, but it doesn't change anything. We have to have a really serious conversation in which we will focus, first of all, on, there are these 2 eternal questions: who's guilty and what to do. And of course, we have to focus on what to do now. And who's guilty will be determined by a due process in time. And I'm sure this is also an important question to answer. But at this point, we have to understand that we have a common goal and we have a common interest, and what we can do to achieve this common interest. And I think the first thing to do is to also stop this rhetoric, which is being used very widely on all sides. I'm not accusing just one side or one particular group of doing that. And also, it is important to stop, responding to this information warfare or the provocations from Turkey or from Azerbaijan, or they can come sometimes from third countries, because we know that Turkey and Azerbaijan, they work, they spend a lot of money in third countries, in Russia, in Europe, in US, and so on. So we do need to somehow have immunity to this kind of provocations, which I understand that it is difficult, because after the shock of the war, people don't know who to believe, people don't know who to trust. The official information that was being given during the war by the military sources and by state sources, then, things were changing and people were realizing that things have changed and that's not exactly what they thought was happening. So this is something that happens during the war, and this is also understandable why people often don't trust the officials anymore, and they don't trust the media. So I think here also the role of the civil society, the role of the good journalist is very important, the role of the expert community, because people need to have someone or something that can verify the information. When they don't know who to trust, there should be some experts or the media or civil society organizations who people will turn to, and they will know that these people are, they are not supporting one side or the other. These are people who have no interest in promoting some kind of narrative. These are just people who want to know the truth and want to share it. So I think that will be the first step to end this kind of mutual accusations and internal divisions, and to have immunity against the information warfare. And from then on, we can build on that.
Thank you very much. I just want to add for Gohar, there have been 2 meetings of civil society in Yerevan, those who are working in different fields in trying to develop a strategy to assist government. So I think there was a second one was last week, and we're trying to have another one. And the idea was also to meet with the government, with the National Assembly, to meet with the government and discuss how expert community or civil society can be helpful in overcoming this situation, because most of us have quite extensive knowledge in different areas, and we might be really very useful for this in this situation. Questions? More questions? No questions? If we have no questions, I think, I have to thank Mikayel Zolyan very, very much, and hope very much that you will join our meetings again and be part of our discussions, which was really very important. And we really are very inspired by what you said, and hope very much that we meet together again in this format and outside. Thank you very much, Mikayel.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for organizing this event. And also I want to thank everybody who was watching us. It's quite late in the evening in Armenia, so I'm sure people had other things to do. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.